welcome back to my channel, or for those who are watching for the first time, welcome to my channel. So on this channel so far, I've created a series of videos about the medical school application process. I've gone into great detail about how to ask for letters of rec, when you should be doing different parts of the process, how to write a personal statement, and how to prepare so that you can ace your interview day. But now what I wanted to do is create a much shorter video that just summarizes my 10 top tips for how best to get into medical school. Tip number 1 is do things as early as possible. This means submitting letter of recommendation requests early rather than late, before your professor has already written 50 letters of recommendation. This means submitting your primary application as close to that opening date as possible. And this means having a quick turnaround time for secondary applications. Don't let them sit in your inbox for 4 weeks before you even decide to look at them. And then when interview invites come out, answer them as quickly as you can. Be on top of your email. Be refreshing it frequently so that you can be as quick about all of this as possible. Because that sense of initiative and that sense of eagerness is going to make a really strong impression on the admission committees at the medical schools you're applying to. Tip number 2. Submit essays that could only be written by you. Here's what I mean by that. Let's say someone you're really close with has a pile of 10 different essays. Let's say you've written one of them and strangers have written the other 9. That person should easily be able to pick which of those 10 was written by you. And so whenever you're submitting any essays for medical school, whether your personal statement or whether secondary essays, it's important for you to really write something that other people couldn't be talking about, other people couldn't be saying, because this ensures that there is a huge element of uniqueness within those essays that you're writing, and that's what's really going to make you stand out from your fellow applicants. This is very similar to my next tip, which is show as much personality as possible. It can be really tempting to write these essays in a really formal way, using a bunch of big ticket words that sound like you used to study dictionaries in your free time. And it can sound really polished and really formal and really beautiful, and maybe it would get you an A+ in an English 101 class. But that is not the vibe you should be going for with these application essays for medical school. You want something that's original, creative, and that really strongly screams, you wrote this. You wrote this, you've injected your personality into it. It sounds more like you're talking to a close friend than to an interviewer. And so whenever you're writing, try really hard to make sure that what you're saying is a real reflection of what you would actually say in real life, not a reflection of what you would put in an English 101 essay. And then tip number 4 is try to highlight as many aspects of your personality as possible. So let's say you are really good at cancer research. It can be really tempting to talk about cancer research in your personal statement and in all of your secondary essays. But that's not the best tactic if you actually want to get into medical school. Rather, think about all of the impressive elements of who you are. Maybe in addition to doing cancer research, you're also a star volleyball player. Or let's say you have a huge passion for space and have had internships at NASA. So try your best to incorporate all those impressive aspects of yourself in different parts of your application, rather than repeating the same thing over and over again. Tip number 5, view the application process as a marathon rather than a sprint. I have students who start the application process in May and expect to submit their application in June. And that is crazy. That is bonkers, because this process takes a long time if you want to do it properly. If you're trying to do every single thing in May, you're going to be incredibly stressed, really overwhelmed, and the quality of your work will most certainly suffer. And so keep in mind that this process is going to take a while, and I think if you go into that knowing it, it might make it a little bit easier to bear when it just keeps dragging on and you feel like there's no end in sight. Tip number 6 is apply broadly. I would say one of the main reasons students don't get accepted into medical schools is because the list of schools they applied to was really narrow. You know, if your GPA and MCAT score are below all the averages of all the schools you've applied to, that's not ideal. Instead, make sure that you're applying to a wide breadth of schools, which includes your state schools, which includes schools that are probably safety schools for you. And it can definitely include also a fair share of reach schools. But it's important that you're really realistic about your competitiveness as an applicant, and the schools that you choose to apply to are a reflection of how competitive you are. Tip number 7 is apply to schools that fit you. So as I just mentioned, it's important that you consider MCAT score and GPA when deciding which schools to apply to. But it's also important to look at what your interests are and find schools that match those interests. I personally was really interested in addiction medicine when I applied to medical school. And so one of the first things I looked at were which medical schools had really strong addiction medicine programs. Because a lot of admissions committees are going to really like students whose interests mirror the strengths of that respective med school. And so if your application just screams that you love addiction medicine and you're applying to a school that doesn't even have an addiction medicine program, that's not a great fit, and the admissions committee will recognize that. Tip number 8. Get a second set of eyes to look over your application. This could be a professor, a parent, a friend, or even a medical school consultant. It doesn't really matter who you choose, but what is important is that you are not sending in an application, a personal statement, before anyone else but you has looked at it. Because maybe you're missing some red flags that someone else would easily be able to identify. It's a great idea to have help throughout this process, and while being able to do it on your own might sound admirable, it really is not, and rather it's risking your odds of getting in if you're missing things that someone else would easily see. Tip number 9, tell a story with your application. Some people have like this perfectly constructed application and everything they've done just automatically tells this perfect story. But a lot of students have a lot of disparate interests that don't really fit together very well. Maybe you're really interested in sports and this really esoteric research topic, and maybe you also really like to travel in your free time, and I don't know. The point is, a lot of students have interests that don't really fit together very well. And if you just give an application to an admissions officer that doesn't tell a story and rather just looks like a hogwash of different things, that's not going to reflect well on you as an applicant. So what's important is that you look at all the activities you've done, all of your accomplishments, all the classes you've taken, and try to come up with at least somewhat of a cohesive story to make sense of it all. And if you're able to tell a really cohesive story with your application, even if the pieces might not naturally fit together very well, it's going to have a huge impact on the admissions officer reading through that application, being able to understand who you are as an applicant. Tip number 10 is keep your sights on your main goal. There are parts of this application process that are really hard to get through, especially secondaries. Secondaries can be literally like 2 months of just writing essays ad nauseum until you feel like you can't spew words out any longer. And it can be really hard to keep up morale during that time. It can be really hard to keep trying your best and giving 100%, even when it feels like you've been giving 100% forever. And I think what's most helpful during those times is keep your focus on your main goal. And the main goal is not getting into medical school. The main goal is being the physician that you want to be, the physician who helps patients and potentially saves lives. And the more you focus on that, and the more you feel how great it's going to be to get to that point, the more you're going to have the energy to make it through the really hard drudgery of secondaries, interviews, etc. And so those are my 10 tips. Things to do, things to keep in mind, things to remember when you're applying to medical school. Because I'm not going to lie, this process is hard. It's challenging. It will challenge you past what you even imagine your limits to be. But it's also really rewarding. The ability to be a physician and work with patients in some of the most vulnerable moments is a huge privilege that is definitely worth the work it takes to get there. And so these 10 tips aren't going to make the work go away, but hopefully they will make things a little clearer and make you guys feel like you're better able to approach this process prepared and ready to go. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Please hit that like button if you learned anything at all from what I said, and please subscribe to my channel for more tips and tricks for the medical school application process. Again, thank you guys so much, and I'll see you in my next video.